Greetings, parish orphans and retrogrades. Happy feast of Saint Joseph. Today's a solemnity of the patron of household patriarchs, special patron saint of this show. I look to St. Thomas Aquinas as a patron of this show. I really pray specially to Saint Joseph. Ita ad Joseph. Go to Joseph, folks. The Case for Patriarchy is best made by St. Joseph. Pick up this book. It's on sale for $5 at Sophia Institute Press, Crisis Publications, Sophia Institute Press. Do so in celebration of the feast of St. Joseph. Pray for us. So today I have a special kind of show. It's, for one thing, a cleanup for the technological difficulties that we suffered on Saturday. If you watched it, then you saw, for the first time ever in about 450 shows on this channel, we're approaching our 500th show, we got kicked off. We got kicked off live streaming, and you can't just glue one live stream that ends back to another and make a one show out of it with a little seam in the middle. So that's fine. This is Francis endorsing the Pagan Mayan rite, part 2. It's basically the part of the show where I, in a same way, substantiate the claims made by Dr. Hickson. We're tending to the characterizations of Francis really endorsing paganism last show. And we are borrowing from Dr. Micah Hickson's excellent article up this weekend on Excellent Life Site. Now we're going to get to her evidence portion of, and we're going to kind of run through it, of why would we say that Francis is actually just endorsing paganism in the Latin Mass, in the Latin Rite Mass? Well, because he is, as Dr. Hickson argues. Okay, so that's what we're doing today. In the second part of the show, I'm bringing in a special guest, Ryan Moreau, a very cool guy, who just presented this past weekend at Hope is Fuel, Patrick Coffin's conference against anxiety. And we're going to be talking specifically about hope in the realm of the Pope. Even if you think, nope, maybe he's not Pope.
Which is a cope.
Which is a cope. All right. Enough of that. But yeah, so Ryan and I will just be dialoguing 10 years of Francis now. How do you have hope when we tell the EOs and the prots universal jurisdiction? Well, that means some really, really frightening things when the Pope is this bad. How do we have hope in the face of it? We're going to talk about that as a kind of cope to this earlier segment. But we do have to substantiate the things, in the words of Dr. Micah Hickson, that we're saying on Saturday. So this is a part 2 of why it's true that Francis has, in fact, I think, endorsed the pagan Mayan rite. Before we do that, I want to remind everyone, get out of your blue state, go to a red state, use realestateforlife.org to do so. Get out of your blue state, get to a red state, source for hope. Even in a crumbled version of the United States of America, if you get to a red state, particularly a red state around a bunch of other red states like Mississippi or Alabama, you're in a reasonably safe spot. Go to realestateforlife.org. Please do, if you want to support this channel, go to Subscribestar and give. Even $5 a month is a big help. We need to keep the lights on here. Go to Subscribestar, or you could also use Locals. You could also go to timothyjgordon.com and click donate to help us. We need to keep the lights on. Like, subscribe, click the notification bell on this video. In a March 14th interview with Mexican Bishop Martinez, there are 3 elements, according to Bishop Martinez from Mexico, where he says that this Mayan pagan rite, though he likes it, he's not condemning it, has basically, it's the Latin rite with 3 elements of adaptation. There are 3 things added to the Latin rite that make it this new Mayan rite that Francis actually celebrated as far back as 2016. And it proves a couple things. For one, Francis is not doing away with all versions of the Latin Rite that are not the Novus Ordo. Repeat, Francis is not doing away with all versions of the Latin Rite that are not the Novus Ordo, just the real Catholic Mass, the TLM, because he hates it. He is allowing 3 adaptations which change it so much, the Latin Rite, that is basically a new rite. So it's like by ritualism, even though he says that he wants to avoid this in order to justify extirpating the TLM. He's not. Here are the 3 elements of adaptation that go into the Mayan rite, which is just a Latin rite adapted, according to Bishop Martinez. 1, prayers led by a layman. By the way, this has already been approved by the higher ups at the Congregation for Divine Worship, and it's been practiced for years in the Mayan rite. That's number 1. Prayers at the liturgy led by a layman. Number 2, already approved by the CDW and already practiced. The censing office is conducted by a lay woman. A lay woman is the one doing the censing. Already approved and practiced. Remember, part 2 reminds us about the way that the permanent diaconate is being abused, and I think abused by design from around Vatican II. In this Amazonian and in this Mayan region, Central and South America, they purposely are having deacons and their wives be basically ordained together by the bishop, which is an abuse, a secret backdoor to ordaining women. And the deacon and their wives are running entire parishes in areas of Mexico and South America. So that's part of why the prayers are being led by the layman, a lot of times deacon, sometimes not even ordained. The censing office is being conducted in the Mayan rite by lay women. 3rd element of adaptation, it's really a Mayan rite, which is the Latin rite adapted, is an indigenous Thanksgiving dance. I know you'll love this, Steph. An indigenous Thanksgiving dance to close out the rite. Mayan dances at the end of Mass are ways to communicate with all of the gods, which are demons. And Mexican Bishop Martinez from this area near Chiapas, where the Mayan rite is strongest and is like an experiment that's really, according to them, going well because it's bringing in paganism. His friend, Bishop Aguilar, agrees it's going well. He calls this form of dance a form of prayer. Worshiping false gods, which are demons, is a form of prayer. I want to remind folks of something that I said on Saturday before we got cut off, which was this. Pope Francis approves this Mayan rite. Pope Francis has participated in this Mayan rite 7 years ago. Pope Francis loves the pagan gods that are being worshipped and communicated with. You're hearing the bishops say it in these direct quotes. I'm taken from Dr. Micah Hickson's article on LifeSite that came up on Friday. And you know what? This is nothing other than one more iteration of the pattern that we see all throughout the Old Testament of the people of God falling into violations of the first commandment. And the violations of the first commandment by the people of Israel, where they're worshiping false gods, are always instances of enculturation, where they're still kind of worshiping God, but they're peppering in other gods. Remember that website we found? If you didn't see part 1 of this video from Saturday, go watch it. It ended suddenly, but it's worth a watch. Steph read from this website where we were just like 30 seconds before we rolled camera on the video. I was like, let's find something really quick that says what Aaron, Moses's brother, is guilty of in essence, in toto. And it said very specifically something that's perfectly opposite, perfectly on all fours with what we're seeing here in the Mayan rite and Pope Francis's pagan idol worship. Not just Pachamama, but the Mayan stuff. Here's what it said, in essence. The ancient Israelites were always flirting over the course of centuries with the admixture of enculturated pagan worship as they worship God. That's precisely what you see with the Mayan rite.
Because what they were familiar with.
What they were familiar with is their culture that, especially as the Jews in the Old Testament were getting dominated by some new political overlord, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, then the Romans. They were always flirting with the overlord's polytheism. They were the only monotheism. And they alone have the command number 1 of the 10 commands, to not worship the other gods. And they were wanting to be with the world. And being with the world means you worship their city gods as well, their civic gods. You worship their empire gods, the emperor usually. You worship their pagan gods in the case of the Greeks and the Romans. So it's a weird pattern. I remember reading the Old Testament in middle school and being like, this is odd. Why are they flirting throughout history in and out? They're dabbling in and out of pagan idol worship. It's not something I'm tempted to do. When I was in middle school, I was tempted at, whatever, pride or maybe lust or something like that, some personal sin. I'm never tempted to do pagan idol worship, but the elders are, because they want to be with the world. And Francis is now giving it, like Moses, who is the leader of the people of God. Francis is the leader. And Francis has done much more than Moses in terms of enabling it. Francis is actually more like Aaron. Aaron actually fashioned the gold idol, right?
Yep. Comfort the people, to make them to mingle things that they were familiar with
things that they weren't. Yeah. Thank you. That's so good. So, okay, here are the 3 big ways that Dr. Micah Hickson proves the case that Francis has, in fact, engaged in pagan idol worship in this Mayan rite that he participated in February 15th, 2016. I lost where I wrote the date, but I remember it was February 15th, 2016. There are 3 things. The Mayan altar is very, very important to the pagans. The pagans in Chiapas, South Mexico. There's a connection between heaven and the goddess Mother Earth, which will be called, you guessed it, Pachamama in related regions slightly further south of Central America. So the Mayan altar is very important to connect heaven and the earth demon bitch goddess Pachamama. The altar is the most important element there. So I'm gonna tell you what I learned from Dr. Micah Hickson's LifeSite article about the Mayan altar that was incorporated into this pagan mass where Francis worshipped false gods more or less directly on February 15th, 2016. Secondly, there's an intentional conflation by Francis and the cardinals and bishops that like this enculturation with the Mayan mass, an intentional conflation between post-Columbian traditions and pre-Columbian traditions. What is a post or pre-Columbian tradition? They're talking about Christopher Columbus. They're talking about Christopher Columbus, that based Catholic man, hero, he should be a saint, who brought Roman Catholicism to all of those pagan savages in the New World. He brought Christianity. So when they say we want to mix in pre-Columbian traditions, this is the euphemism of euphemisms. Columbus turned pagan savages into Christians in the New World. They want to go back to, let's bring in some more of that stuff. Let's sprinkle in some of that pre-Columbian stuff. Let's bring in more traditions that were pre-Christian, that were savage, Native Indian American, pre-Columbian pagan traditions. And so those are just kind of a smattering of random traditions. That's number 2. The Mayan altar the pre-Columbian traditions. And number 3, the mother goddess, the earth mother, heinous bitch goddess that a little bit further south of Chiapas will be called Pachamama. Okay, let's go Mayan altar first. And then I want to bring Ryan Moreau in here, and we can talk about why should we be hopeful in the face of all of this strange, really terrifying paganism that Francis has incorporated into Roman Catholicism. He's like a pagan idol worshiper. Pope number 266. What do we do with that? We probably undersold the case with Pachamama in October of 2019 with the Amazonian Synod, which is, people say that people like me and Lifeside and Eric Sammons and Taylor Marshall and Tim Flanders and those kinds of folks, they say we're overselling how bad Francis is. We're probably, in the case of Pachamama from 3.5 years ago, we probably undersold it. As much as we talked about it, was probably an undersell. And I'm not going to do that. Learning as I did this weekend, brand new revelation that 3 years before Pachamama in 2019, 3.5 years before it, Francis had already celebrated a pagan demon worship, pagan false god worship mass in February of 2016. And it's not the Amazonian rite where Pachamama is being brought in. It's the Mayan rite where the Mayan altar was introduced. It's a connection between heaven and goddess Mother Earth. The Mayan altar, Dr. Mike Hickson reminds us, is already found in a Catholic church culture in the area. Catholic churches, if you go to Chiapas, already has the Mayan pagan altar in lots of its churches, according to Micah Hickson's article. Holy hour at the Mayan altar how is there a Mayan altar in a Catholic church? Mayan altar, this is the child sacrificing pagan culture of death and murder and, cannibalism, molestation, and child sacrifice. How is there a holy hour at the Mayan altar? Well, there is. Cardinal Arizmendi, who is one of Francis's lieutenants in the region, making sure that the paganism gets incorporated into Catholicism, says, quote, God is invoked at the heart of heaven and the heart of earth at the, end quote, at the Mayan altar, which is this heart of the nexus, the connection between heaven and pagan version of Mother Earth. This is pure pagan worship. The colors of blue and green, for those of you who have ever been to South Mexico, if you've been to church there, maybe Mexican Americans, the Mayan altar is marked by blue and green, very important demonic earth worship, pagan colors. Violation of the first commandment. Not anytime you see a blue and green painting. Turquoise is one of my favorite colors. It's a mixture of blue and green. But in the context of the Mayan altar, when you see blue and green, this means worship of false gods, particularly the goddess of Mother Earth. People will write me, I guarantee you, yes, I've been to South Mexico. Blue and green is everywhere on the altars. I guarantee that's going to be the comments because this show has retrogrades and Parajorvans from all around the world. Pine needles are another symbol, sign associated with the Mayan altar. They represent pagan infinity and communication with ancestors. So this is true necromancy. The Protestants say we pray to and try to commune with our dead ancestors. No. There's saints. We ask saints to pray for us. That's not necromancy. Actual pine needle Mayan cult earth and ancestor worship means you're actually trying to do the necromancy that you see. What was that horrifying movie with the necromancy we just saw? Shouldn't have watched it. From a satanic house. What's it called? No. We saw a really scary demonic movie. Didn't know how satanic it was. Genetic or something like that. I'm forgetting what it was called. Horrible. The Mayan shell, like a conch shell, is used for some stupid indigenous reason that's ultimately demonic. So they use a conch shell, they use pine needles to communicate with the dead. They use blue and green colors, which is pagan worship, on the Mayan altar. The Mayan altar also uses those baby rattles called sonajas that are very, very well known in Hollywood. You see these in lots of demonology movies. There's always a rattle, and these are pagan South American and Central American ways of communing with the dead. These are on the Mayan altar in lots of churches in Chiapas, smiled upon and celebrated in one form or another by Pope Francis, at least that one time on February 15, 2016, where there was a Mayan altar present, I believe. And he is implementing this with his lieutenant cardinals and bishops in the region in Central and South America, where he's like, use these rattles, use these pine needles, use the blue and green, use the conch shell, the Mayan shell. This is all good. This is enculturation. No, it's not. It is not good. It is pagan idol worship. They have candles, which enables communication with one's ancestors, necromancy. Ritual dances performed by indigenous women around the Mayan altar, and this also allegedly facilitates the demonic connection with the ancestors. Now, let's go to the second theme that you're going to find if you go into any of these churches in South Mexico, where Francis and the Congregation for Divine Worship have implemented, through lieutenants like Cardinal Arizmendi, the Mayan rite, the Mayan adaptations on the Latin rite. The second main theme after we talk about the Mayan altar is the mother goddess, earth mother. The earth is the divine fecundity. I think Cardinal Arizmendi says this directly. He's a cardinal in the Roman Catholic Church, a lieutenant of Francis's. And he is acknowledging, at least, if not asserting, that, quote, the earth is the divine fecundity. Now, in the Indian mythology, in the Mayan mythology, they worship what we would say is a bitch demon goddess, like Pachamama, not unlike Pachamama. And Cardinal Arizmendi is saying this in what sounds like an endorsement. In 2021, Diocesan Seminary of San Cristobal in South Mexico hosted a conference on Indian, like American Indian theology, with Professor Eleazar Lopez Hernandez. And they talked about all of this Mayan demon worship as a good thing that ought to be incorporated into the Mass. How can we worship, in other words, false gods, false Mayan gods from this wicked culture in the Catholic liturgy? And they've been doing it for at least 5 years in 2021, because in 2016, Francis took part in one of these with most of these Mayan elements. I can't tell you every single one of these Mayan elements are there, but according to Dr. Micah Hickson, on February 15, 2016, Pope Francis celebrated this Mayan worship mass of false gods that incorporated all these elements, just like he would do more famously 3 years later with the Amazonian Synod, where they worshiped Pachamama in a ceremony outside the St. Peter's in the Vatican Gardens. Mayan theology is put into social justice warrior contexts, liberation theology contexts, according to Dr. Micah Hickson. Remember, the ancient third world cultures in armpit places in the world were always different from first world countries that were very successful, like in Europe, insofar as they always worshiped the feminine. This is an old thing, and feminists will say, look at these third world countries that worship the feminine instead of worshiping God as with masculine properties. So feminism runs nicely with the false gods of the Egyptians. You see it in the Old Testament. There's a lot of female goddesses that are very important in Egyptian worship in the Old Testament. Same thing with Babylonian worship. Same thing with Lilith, the demon goddess, who hates Adam and Eve. Same thing with the Mayan religion. The feminine is very important. Social justice is very important. Liberation theology is, if not explicitly noted, it's insinuated by all of the things, all the elements of Mayan altar and Mayan mother goddess that we're talking about. The Mayan altar, which we already made reference to, is the subject, I forgot to mention this, of an entire book by a priest of San Cristobal, Father Jose Elias Hernandez. And again, in that book on the Mayan altar, feminism is a prominent part of how the Mayan altar works. Feminism is a prominent part of how his diocesan work plays out. They're trying to get the wives of deacons to be ordained. They have essentially been ordained by implication, because the bishop there lays his hands on the head of the permanent deacon, which is a bad idea, and his wife. So ambiguously, you'd have to check the technical details. Maybe the wife just got ordained, even though she can't be. Pope Benedict disabled this practice in the region, and I believe Francis has all but brought it all the way back. Just like Cardinal McCarrick. Think about it. Benedict took him out of commission, life of quiet penance. Francis brought him back. In this region, South Central and Northern South America, Benedict says, whoa, they're crypto ordaining deacons' wives as like another part of the diaconate. So we're just getting rid of the permanent diaconate. Francis is saying, bring it back, and has it sounds like all but brought it back. Okay, the third element, besides the mother goddess and the Mayan altar, are these disparate, random pre-Columbian traditions that are being conflated into Catholic worship. Pre-Columbian traditions is the euphemism of euphemisms for pre-Christian pagan demon worship. Let's conflate some demon worship. They call it pre-Columbian. Dr. Sanchez Franco is a big student of this, a big advocate of this. He said, Bishop Ruiz, who I mentioned earlier in the show, pointed out that the God venerated in Indian theology was not different from the Jesus worshipped in Catholicism. This is religious indifferentism. It's religious syncretism. It is multiculturalism at its very most sinful. And it's literally what got Aaron fried in the Old Testament, Moses' brother. It's what got the Israelites fried time after time after time after time with God. The violation of the first commandment, thou shalt not have other gods besides me. It's the main thing to anger God and cause him to flood the earth and to kill us and to send us to hell, is worshiping demons. The mixture of demon worship into the liturgy, which gives what's just to God, to the one true God. And that's what Francis is doing here, like Aaron. He's saying, let's mix in the demon worship to our worship of the one true God. Maybe the one true God, Jesus Christ, is the God venerated by Mayan theology. You just have this quote from Dr. Sanchez Franco. Such a deacon's wife, Cardinal Arizmendi assures us, is involved in the deacon's ordination. And women do the incensing of ritual celebrations. We've mentioned both of these elements, and you have it being affirmed by Cardinal Arizmendi, one of the right hands of Pope Francis in the region. We want the deacon's wife being ordained, even though this was declaimed as the reason for discontinuing the permanent diaconate in the region altogether by Pope Benedict, because it's leading to this heretical quasi-ordination of women. Well, Francis, of course, wants the ordination of women and is about to go for it in October of this year. And he's been crypto, half semi-hemi doing it since at least 2016 in this region of South and Central America. The deacon's wife kisses the altar, which is a priestly sacerdotal task, at the beginning of the Mass, according to Cardinal Arizmendi. That's a pre-Columbian tradition. That is a feminist, pagan, Mayan tradition that Francis and his minions have incorporated into the Mayan version of the Latin Rite. So there's so much to talk about here that just double check me. If I said any of this hastily or errantly, then it will come out in the wash just by reading Dr. Micah Hickson's excellent, lengthy, it's like 3,000 plus words, article on LifeSite from Friday. Go check it out yourself. It's really important. This is worse and more explicit and more like a doctrinal view of liturgy by Francis on paganism mixed with the liturgy than you got in the Vatican Gardens Pachamama ceremony of 2019. I was never quite sure. It was bad, but I was never 100% sure that Francis meant to be a part of that. I was always 95% sure, but this is actually Francis celebrating a more explicitly pagan false gods liturgy. And it's 3.5 years before he did the Vatican Gardens thing. So the diocese to look up is San Cristobal de las Casas. Cardinal Arizmendi is kind of the main villain here. In parentheses, think Francis, because Francis is the one that tapped him to do this. The papal Mayan Mass celebrated in 2016 is the proof text that Francis knows what's going on. February 15, 2016, he celebrated a false god's Mass. I want to bring in here a really cool guy, my friend, Dr. Ryan Moreau, who just presented on Saturday at Patrick Coffin's Hope is Fuel conference, because he and I just have a lot in common. I really like Ryan a lot. And what we're talking about is, first off, we can just lay the foundation by saying, what does this mean about Francis? As always, I tell you, I don't know. Some people have said that this is what was the term? A weaselish way of avoiding saying what is obvious about Francis. I guess for Ann Barnhart, who wrote an article about me last week, saying simply, I don't know what this means, this is unprecedented, is weaselish, instead of jumping to conclusions, which is evidently heroic, according to Barnhart. It's what women do. It's what women do, and it's effeminate when men do it. I'm telling you, lots of stuff I know. I know the 4 pillars of this channel. I know the TLM's better than the Novus Ordo. I'd bet you everything. In God's view, this is way better. But I know the 4 pillars of retrogrades: home education, educate your own kids; patriarchy, buy this book; patriarchy, subsidiarity; right-wing community organizing. Those are the 4 pillars of this channel. I'm certain, and I've told people, certainly get out of your blue state, get to a red state. There's no doubt here. If you're still in your blue state, get to a red state by any legal, moral means. Go to realestateforlife.org. I'm not just saying that. I give you about as much certitude. I peddle in certitude where I can. But anxiety is caused by all of the uncertitude that Francis has deliberately brought. He said the point of his pontificate is to make a mess, which confuses people. Ryan Moreau, how are you, sir? What do you think about all of this uncertitude?
Oh, that's easy, Tim. Just give me like 10 seconds. I can answer it all for you just perfectly, the way maybe Anne would want. No, first off, I do want to. I think you need to be more emotional in your response, is what this comes down to. It sounds like, and just give us the answer immediately, however you feel.
Yeah, I do.
Before I answer, I do want to clarify one thing. So, and I think Patrick's okay with me saying this. I'm actually the guy behind the guy with Hope is Fuel. So Hope is Fuel, he mentioned me on the last time he was on with you. Hope is Fuel was actually an idea I had 9 years ago. So I'm really in charge of, I guess you'd say, kind of founded it, brought him as a co-founder, and was the backup to present in this in case we had anybody fall out. I was really helping to curate, I guess you could say, what we were doing then and what we're doing in the future with really my background as a business guy. So just for clarity, I want to make sure nobody knows I certainly have opinions. I also have some objective truth that hopefully can be shared. But I didn't actually present last week, and I was going to jump in the case that we didn't. Now, that being said, as you were talking and I was listening in, it's funny, you come in with a plan to say one thing, and don't worry, I'm not going too rogue. But the first thing that actually hit me was, as Catholics, as Christians, Romans 8:28 immediately came to mind. People say, what do we do? Like, what's going to happen? Where do we go? How do we have hope in the midst of this crazy Pope? Whether you think he's Pope or not Pope or whatever's going on, right? Whatever side of the camp you're on. But the funny part is, like, there is a big question of what is hope. But I go to St. Paul in Romans, and I think all things working together for the good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. There's a level in this game that, and this may be a little bit of, I suppose, of my Protestant roots before I reverted, but like, we know who wins the game in the end. And I think, for me, one of the difficulty things, and I'm a TLM guy, I think, as you know, and I would totally agree with you. It's funny when I think about Peter Kreeft's, story of his coming back to the church, and there were some really good arguments, I believe, when he was up. I want to say he wasn't at Calvin. He was at one of those, Reformed schools. Yeah. And the final argument for him was, well, if Jesus was here today, would he recognize the Protestant service more, or would he recognize the Catholic Mass more, and where would he be more comfortable? And the same argument goes, I think, when it comes to the TLM and the NO. That's not to say when I'm not traveling or something, I don't fulfill my obligation in the NO. I'm not here to make that argument. I'm not smart enough probably to make that argument. But when it comes to the questions of the Pope and hope and how do we cope and all those fun things that you were talking about early on, I think the bigger question is just, what is reality? He doesn't seem to be living in it, unfortunately. And I actually have a funny story about a confession I'd be willing to share kind of vaguely, but I think that will speak to this in terms of maybe where some of the clergy are at in this conversation. Though, unfortunately, I wish they would say more. They seem to get frustrated when guys like you and others are saying things, and it's like, well, maybe it's not their role. And I'm thinking, then why doesn't somebody step up and say it outside of Archbishop Vigano or somebody? Then you guys go do it so that guys like Tim don't have to.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's usually my response. Like, quit bitching. Like, then go do it yourself so that we can go focus on the patriarchy, so we can focus on our families, so we can lead our families into holiness, so that we can do the things that Christ called us to do in this specific vocation. We're not here to be necessarily theologians and philosophers. We can be, and there's certain folks that have that calling even in the midst of being a father. But the reality is just, this is really a check, I think, on each of us. Like, what are we hoping in? A good priest friend of mine talks about the wounded reality that we're living in. And the fact is, we are living in a wounded reality because people can't really figure out what to believe or what to hope in, what's actually true, And so, even with Francis, I think, or I don't even know if I'm supposed to call him Pope Francis. Not, again, don't want to go too down, far down that road, but it is maddening. It's did I even answer your question? I just went a lot of different ways there.
No, that's actually a helpful kind of foundation. You're one of these guys that's like me, I think, honest, Ryan, about, I don't know what the Francis pontificate means. I know it's basically all bad. I do know God wins in the end. I know Christ Jesus crucified is our one solace that means anything. Point number 2. And point number 3, it's fine to be with a pope this bad, with an etiology, an origin story for the pontificate, as shady as he is, as bad as he's acted, as much doctrine as he's contradicted, as much paganism, false idols, and demons he's worshipped in mass. Yeah. I can't remember if the Vatican Gardens thing with Pachamama was actually a mass or just some weird ceremony. This is a mass. he's
Right.
incorporated demons into. So I know it's fine for an honest man. I know we're about the same age. We have, in some ways, a similar background. To sit up here and be like, look, I don't know. The way our mutual friend Pat Coffin says, I know Francis isn't Pope with substantial certitude. He'd say there's at least a 1% chance maybe he is, and there's some fly in the ointment. But 99% is really certain. Neither of us say this. I mean, you're probably closer to, I guess, believing Pat's right than I am. I don't think there's no way that Pat is right. I don't think there's no way. That's a double negative.
Yeah,
I do think yeah, and people are going to be like, wait, you don't think there's any way he's right? No, I don't think there's not zero ways that Coffin et al., all the Benedictine Pope people are right. Or else if I thought there were zero ways they're right, I wouldn't have brought on Ed Mazza to this show several times. I wouldn't, even though Pat would probably still come on the show about other things, I wouldn't let him talk about it on the show. I'd say that's not really the issue I want. I think there's a possibility. Can you just, for a half a minute, Ryan, address the kind of anxiety that one has from a lack of certitude? Because we really fear the unknown, and the way it differs from the kind of anxiety that's caused in the bosom of a Catholic from a certain bad thing. It's a different kind of anxiety, I think, and I think you're qualified to maybe say something about it.
No, I think so. I heard this a long time ago when it comes to uncertitude. People used to always say, oh, I really don't like change. I really don't like change. What people really didn't like was the uncertainty of it. Most people don't mind change. It's really uncertainty that makes folks uncomfortable.
Yes.
When it comes to Francis, I mean, even what you're talking about, this is really layered, right? Like if you get into it, and by the way, I am not far down the road. I want to clarify on making a decision there. In some ways, and I think I mentioned this, previously, this is a little bit of a majoring in the minors thing, because there isn't a lot that we can actually do about it. So as a Catholic, when it comes to anxiety, and I think you speaking to the uncertainty of things, I think that we've flipped, and I actually believe we've done this. We've really flipped what's really important versus what's kind of what we think is urgent. And we've assumed that we have the ability to fix this by continuing. And I know everybody quotes this, people like to quote this, would I rather curse the darkness or shine, light a candle in it? I am in the camp of lighting a candle in it. And when it comes to this stuff, this is dark, man. Like, this is certainly dark. The uncertainty is there, but what is certain? And somebody would tell you too, on the side of anxiety. I know Patrick mentioned this when he came on about me and this Hope is Fuel thing. Like, I've dealt with serious depression. I've dealt with anxiety, stuff people had no idea about. One of the things that I realized was the only thing I could control was myself, my reaction to things, how I was coping in these situations. In a sense, I was putting the hope in myself, but as a Catholic, that hope in myself is understanding that I can't do anything apart from God anyway. So when it comes to Francis, anything, like, what is hope, right? Aquinas would say it's some attainable good that through some kind of hard work and arduous, experience, you're gonna be able to attain. You wouldn't hope in something that's unattainable. It is our hope to attain heaven, for example. When it comes to Pope Francis finding out if he's the Pope, not the Pope, I don't know if you and I, quite honestly, can actually attain that, nor is it necessarily our role. So what is our role? You talk about the patriarchy. Another role is, what can I do with myself in light of my faith, in light of my community, that is helping lead people to unity with God, which is where we find our hope anyway. So it really comes and boils down to a matter of perspective. And that's not to say, I mean, Patrick and I are obviously very close. I think it's great, some of the things that he's talking about and raised. I know, because I know him personally, it's not coming from a place of fear or because I really think Francis is bad. In fact, I think if Francis was the greatest pope in history, he would have maybe even a harder time saying this. Generally, he may not have as much division over it, but I think it would be harder to say that because people are like, what do you mean he's fantastic? This has nothing to do with how good or bad Francis is as a pope, the Benedict XVI. But we're talking about how Pope Francis is difficult right now. And he makes it really difficult for guys like you and me to have a conversation also with maybe Catholics who don't understand the TLM or Protestants who think that they think we don't know the Bible that we actually wrote, or that we compiled, but like, it's really, some of those things are fascinating to me as well.
I mean, I wrote Catholic Republic. The claim is that America can't survive without Rome. I wrote this under Pope Francis. And when I give this book to random conservatives, because it is about how basic principles of cultural and political conservatism are etiologically Catholic, which is a fact. They must be Catholic because Catholic is everything true. And I show them specifically how that's the case. They're like, what a tall order. You're going to say this under number 266? Don't you sort of, I don't want to use the wrong verb here. Don't you disdain the pontificate of your current pope? And I'm like, yes, I do. Yeah. I hold it in opprobrium, like everyone else with half a brain, but it's unchanging. So you're right. Francis has made it hard to evangelize. For one thing, he's condemned it. He says if you evangelize, this is a mortal sin. You can go to hell for evangelizing if you tease out the implications, which are not that abstract. But he's also made it logistically hard to evangelize because he's made a mockery of our faith. He's worshiping pagan idols, man, in Amazonian rites, in Mayan rites. These are wicked. He is wicked, I believe. So
evil is evil, Tim, right? Like, I mean, like evil is evil. We need to call it out. I think that's when I talk about like the wounded reality I mentioned earlier, that's the kind of stuff. It's evil. I mean, I don't want to go deep down certain rabbit trails, like the holes. I don't want to get into all these different things are evil. We know many of these things are evil, and we could go there all day long. But I think there's another side of this. When you talk about Pope Francis, there's and the importance of Catholicism and truth and America, there's a wide gap between the American way and the Catholic way, which is the fullness of truth. And one of those things that's clear to me in the wideness of the gap is there's a level of expectation. I mean, I'm from Orange County, so originally, before I moved up to North Idaho and got to a red state, there is an entitlement that I think Americans have in general. And unfortunately, Catholics haven't realized that we've also taken to that, which is not Catholic at all. So the fact, I used to hear this from Protestant folks years ago when I was in that world. Well, Jesus better come soon. And I would think to why is that? Oh, because America's going down. And I would think to myself, okay, but nobody's cared about like when Argentina was falling apart or Brazil's falling apart. Like, why weren't we saying hurry back Jesus then for them? It's only when things get tough for us. Us Catholics, I think, in that way, have become more American than Catholic. And so we have a really difficult time as we participate in this struggle, but yet we're the supernatural body of Christ. We know we're that. As the Catholic Church, we know they're the supernatural body of Christ. Why is it not okay for us to suffer during these times, knowing what's going to be coming in the future? Instead, we're trying to avoid suffering at all costs, instead of sitting in agony in the garden and saying, okay, Lord, take this cup from me, but not my will, your will be done. That doesn't mean that we're doing nothing. You're participating in the will of God. I'm okay with that. And I actually talked to Patrick. I haven't mentioned this to you. I also have a devotion to Our Lady of Akita. I think she's entirely underrated. She's completely she's been lost. I understand there's some reasons why that may be, and the demonic influence and whatnot, but where are we at with this? Like, why are we walking in fear of all things when we have the ultimate hope, who, by the way, is not the Pope? The first Pope denied Christ 3 times too. So this stuff is not shocking to me, that humans are being human, that we've got perverts walking around taking advantage of their situation. Perverts take advantage of their situation, and this is, by the way, never okay, but whether you're in public school, public office, you're a clergy, you're a pastor, you're a cleric, you're a whatever, guys are always taking position of power. I mean, in the end, this is a matter of mammon and power and what's available to folks. So that's the side, I think, where as Catholics, there's actually easier questions when it comes to hope in the midst of Pope Francis. It's, let's hope in the fact that we know that we're part of the body of Christ because we are suffering, we are participating in the passion of Christ in this process. There are things that we can do to make sure that our life is right, that our faith is right, that our family's faith is right, that we're pouring into the community where people are lacking. Again, I could go on and on about this, but I see you shaking your head. Like, what comes to mind? Is there a follow-up question to that too, that maybe we can head down that path? I mean, what are your thoughts to that?
Well, my favorite, you said a lot of things that I like a lot, but the main idea, not just in this show, which is a part 2 show on an earlier show, but the main idea behind this whole channel is you have to know the difference between what change you can affect and what change you can't. And yes, as a TLM loving Francis
Questioning,
reviling Catholic.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. What you said that's so important is that some of the trads or the trad spin-offs like Anne Barnhart, who are Benedictus Pope, literally called it weaselish to just say suffer with the unknown. The unknown causes anxiety type suffering. And I'm saying suffer with it. There's a difference between a bold, obedient son of the church and a bold, disobedient son of the church. This channel attempts to highlight being bold and obedient. And I'm like, you have to be obedient to Jesus. You don't, if Francis is telling you to worship Mayan idols, you don't have to do that. Jesus gave us permission to follow him in those cases. You know, don't follow my deputies if they're bad deputies that are saying, yeah, like Aaron. Right. Aaron was one of the deputies, like the Pope. Folks get really confused there. The main idea that you're highlighting is suffer with uncertitude. It's better. It's nerve-wracking. Not even total certitude that Francis is Pope, but I assume he is. I'm still assuming he is. I'm assuming something as nerve-wracking as maybe he's not Pope. I think he's probably Pope, not sure. And he's the worst by a mile. You know, no close second. So bad that it means something about history and it means something about where we are in salvation history. And that's really nerve-wracking. Maybe something apocalyptic. I don't quite know. Mm-hmm. But suffer with it. It's still better than suffering with nails in your hands and feet on a cross. If our Lord, our exemplar man, God, everything I want to be as a man and everything I worship as a God, as the one true living God, if he can suffer with hands and feet pierced by nails, then I can suffer with some lack of certitude, even in the most important realm of life, you know, ecclesiology in some sense. And I think you just highlighted that. I just wanted to dwell on that point and make it really explicit that that's, I think, the real gem in what guys like you offer. And sometimes some of us get hung up along the way.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the Lenten season, you know. Right now, when you talk about who we look to, who we want to emulate, who we are trying to be like, is Christ. There's another side of this that as Catholics we have that most folks don't. We have the whole economy of God, I guess you could say, in the midst of his kingdom, and recognizing that if we're to be like Christ, we want to love what he loved. That's what also leads us to him at times through his mother, or we can be led to him through his mother. When I mentioned Our Lady of Akita, of course, people talk about Fatima all the time. This stuff shouldn't be shocking. And in fact, like if we're to be digging deep into our faith, if you are to be hopeless in the midst of all the uncertitude, there are places, very tangible things. I mean, that's another gift of being Catholic, is the tangibility, I guess you could say, of our faith. I mean, we have the sacraments, but we also have these things like Marian apparitions. You know, I'll get people, Christian, you know, friends that will, non-Catholic Christian friends will send me things from some prophet, you know, hey, what do you think about this lady saying this thing over in Hawaii or something? And I'm like, it kind of blows my mind. Like, so that's where you want to hang your hat in the midst of your uncertitude. We also have apparitions of our Blessed Mary, Mother of God, who's come here to tell us this is not shocking, and yet you'd rather listen to this gal over here who is asking you when she's done giving this to you if you'd please support her for $300 because that's what God wants, or whatever it might be. And over on the other side, we have the sun dancing in Fatima. And we have our Blessed Mother and these proven apparitions, nothing wild. I mean, wild in the supernatural sense, but we don't lean into those things as being absolutely true for some odd reason, let alone our own faith. And so a lot of this should should not be unexpected. And you talk about the ultimate end, because this is what we are talking about here, is the ends. And yes, it could be apocalyptic. I don't know. I actually don't get wrapped up into this. It all will work itself out, in God's good time and God's will. But there is not a lot to actually fear, even in the midst of Pope Francis. The one little story I was going to share with you is I actually was in a confessional. This was 4 years ago. And I'm being very careful today, so I don't name any clergy that I maybe was talking to or anything like that. But I will tell you, it's some trustworthy folks in Southern California. And it was a priest in there that I was having a conversation. I said, and this hopefully doesn't get me in trouble, but I just said, I've woke up and gone to bed with Pope Francis. I want him to be dead. This is actually what I had gone to him, and I said, should I be confessing this sin? And first thing he said was, welcome to the club. This is the priest and then he says to me, why? And I said, I'm tired of the disorder. I'm tired of the confusion, and what's going on. And this is in 2019. This is around Pachamama time, is clearly evil. So I think that's the other thing that we have to do as Catholics in the midst of all this. If you want hope, call out what's good and call out what's evil. Be able to articulate what's good and be able to articulate what's evil. Be able to recognize, we talked about it before, what you should give your time and energy and effort to, and what you should not give your time and energy and effort to. These things are very, very simple things to do, but I do believe, and this is the old adage, if Satan doesn't make you sin, he'll make you busy. I think in the midst of our busyness, in the midst of the tizzy that we've been wrapped up in the midst of the uncertitude and the questions and wanting immediate answers, we've gotten impatient in the process, and that impatience is not a virtue. And so in the midst of that impatience, we've lost sight on the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. We've lost sight on the cardinal virtues. People don't realize what cardinal means. They think of a bird, even Catholics that are so many are poorly catechized. It means hinge. Like what are the hinges of this life? If we would just stick ourselves in the middle of those 7 virtues, the theological and the cardinal, trusted the words that Jesus had for us, relied on sacred scripture, took a look at some of the Marian apparitions and what she had to say in the process, and prayed and pursued a life of holiness and unity with God, all your hope would be found in that. We wouldn't actually have to be as uncomfortable as we are. We would just be able to go back to pointing out that's good, that's evil.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to jump in. Stick with the cardinal virtues, people.
Yeah.
Like in terms of broad, abstract, but sufficiently concrete instantiations of virtue. And it's 4 natural things. The 3, faith, hope, charity, those get more abstract. Those are the supernatural virtues, but stick with the 4 cardinal virtues and say, how am I doing at these 4 cardinal virtues every day? Fortitude, prudence, justice, temperance. How am I doing with each of these every day? And that's mildly abstract, but then stick with the 4. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, now you got me going on that. I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's important because I'm thinking about we'll just say the weasel comment, right? So if you were to go back on why you were being called a weasel, and I don't know, and I've heard great things and I've heard not great, and between, and I'm sure people would say good things and bad things about me. It's partially why I typically stay off the screen, quite honestly, is just sort of to protect me and my kids and my wife. But the reality is what you did and the way that you approached it, to me, had fortitude. It's courageous to say, I don't know about something, and that's okay. It's prudent in that circumstance, if you don't have an objectively true answer that can be proven, to say, I don't know. I actually think it's probably all the cardinal virtues, maybe not temperance. I'm sure I could probably find a way to make it work there, but really prudence and fortitude come to mind in you doing that. And I think that if we were to focus on those things, it would change the way we talk to each other, to different people. It would have us to reorder so that we're looking at the right things. We live in a country where people think, oh man, I don't want to suffer. The reality is, and even as Catholics, I don't want to suffer. I'm dreading what's coming down when it comes to the TLM. Don't get me wrong. I hear about this Mayan stuff and I'm thinking, wow, that was really easy for him to go ahead and just create a new liturgy while we're over here with the original one, and that one's not okay.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Go ahead, man.
I know. Yeah. That's the other thing. People will confuse being like, all right, let's be prepared to suffer. But that they will, as many times as you hedge, and you're like, I love the TLM. I really don't like the NOM. I really dislike it. I've made a lot of fun of it on this channel in, I think, clever and sometimes hilarious ways, if I do say so myself. I really disfavor the Francis pontificate as strongly as is allowed. But salvation is still possible through Jesus on the cross. I have a giant crucifix over here I look at. Through, in natural ways, the four cardinal virtues they're not salvific themselves. I'm not a Pelagian, but through Jesus on the cross, we prove it through the four cardinal virtues every day. And then through the most concretized version of how we evidence it is through, I think, the four, if you want to get really specific, the four pillars of this show. Educate your children. That's how you get yourself to heaven vis-a-vis your children. You love your spouse and get them also to heaven by your spousal love. But educate your children. Be a patriarch to your spouse, men. Subsidiarity. But we need to be locally governing. That really begins in the home. That goes with patriarchy. And then we need to be right-wing community organizing. And that means, like, if you're in a blue state, get to a red state and become active with your neighbors. Food storage, food prep. A lot of people do the farming. I find food storage, for my reasons, a better alternative. Do one of those two. Have weapons and ammo stored up for lawful use. Know who you can co-farm with or share food with among your neighbors. Organize locally. Keep out the filth in your local area. Not on my lawn, not in my town. Are we having any of the L or the G or the B or the T indoctrination, particularly of children? None of the feminist indoctrination, particularly of children. These are the four ways you can make a huge difference. And I mean, I'm not trying to soft brag, but I don't know any other channel, Catholic or secular conservative, that's like, here are the four pillars. If you're worried, if you have anxiety, tend to this stuff that you can make a difference with. Once I start going there, people are like, what, you don't like the Latin Mass or you love Pope Francis? I'm like, no, but I'm not a bishop. And they're like, what about going to SSPX? I'm like, I'm not a bishop. I literally just do what I'm told liturgically. I can whine about it loudly. I can whine about it fashionably. I can whine about it hilariously. Sometimes I do that. But like you said before, Ryan, this show is about those four pillars: home education, patriarchy, subsidiarity, right-wing community organizing, as they're oriented in a specifically Catholic trajectory. Do any of those involve the TLM? No, I do a bunch of TLM shows, though, because the news is so egregious and the bishops won't do their job. Are any of those about Pope Francis? No, but the news is so egregious and the bishops and priests will barely do their job to push back in ways that are illicit for them. So yes, we do lots of TLM and Francis shows, but they're not part of the four pillars of the show. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the major first Alcoholics Anonymous way of overcoming anxiety is by knowing what you can change, knowing what you can't, the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah, no, that's right. The other thing is, you're talking, I'm like, you know what? I guess I'd put it like this. Why do we think, or what are we so attached to? This goes back to kind of the person when you talk about what we can change and know what we can't. Like, as Catholics, what are we so attached to that we're not okay with what's going on? Now, by the way, I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth. I'm not okay with what's going on either, just for clarity. But what I am saying is, why do we think that it's not allowed to happen? Or can we detach ourselves from recognizing that we have to have, this answer? It's we don't live in the same world that we lived in the 1500s. I mean, that's obvious. We live in a different world now, whether we like it or not. Toothpaste is out of the tube in many ways. There are certain things I was talking to Patrick about this. I was talking about technology over the weekend. I had somebody that said, hey, can you guys do a Hope is Fuel conference on, I think it was it was a good idea, but it was physical community building instead of technological community building. And I thought, you know, we're laughing because we're like, the irony in that, right? Like, you want us to do a technological event about why we should get physical, but like, it's not mocking. It's a both and thing. So like, what you're doing is so important because you're calling us into that space when you talk about being local. And homeschooling is a physical thing. The patriarchy is a physical thing. Subsidiary is a physical thing, and so is the community building, the right wing community building. So, or community organizing. I think those are the four you said. So, so as Catholics, what are we doing? Starting with each of those things, looking at the virtues and allowing ourselves to be detached from not wanting any mystery whatsoever. I had a spiritual director who had almost become Catholic, had studied under Catholics, and in my reversion process, he and I were together for quite some time, and he's a great man. But he never fully came into the church, and he and I were having a conversation. He said, it was actually during the COVID, stuff. And he's like, I just, with Pope Francis and all that's going on, I don't really understand how you made your way back in. And I said, well, what's very clear when you have the fullness of truth is that really things are all black and white. And if they aren't, then they're a mystery. They're not gray. And so like most of the world wants you to believe that the gray is an actual alternative to the black and white. It's really not. It's a mystery. And it's why it's okay at times to say, I don't know about something. But when we do know, we should call it out as good, call it out as bad. What Francis is doing is flat out evil. And so we should call it evil. If he doesn't like it, we can, I'd be happy to talk. Well, I don't know. I'm afraid of what he'd do to me, but like, which is not a good thing, probably. And maybe that'll just add to the anxiety. But no, the reality is we need to reorder our own lives. And I think that's what you're calling us to with the show. I mean, this is a matter of reordering, because if you did reorder your life and you did get yourself to that place where you allowed yourself to let go, you did allow yourself to suffer, not as a masochist. I mean, it's not like we're running around going, please torture me right now so I can be like Jesus. Nobody wants that. And going back to Romans 8:28, all things are working together. So from an eternal perspective, this little blip that we have right now, what are we doing in this time? We're trying to get our families to get ourselves to heaven, get our families to heaven, get those in our sphere of influence to heaven. We're trying to let go. We're trying to do what Christ called us to, which is actually to die to ourselves every single day, take up our cross and follow him. And it's funny because sometimes it seems like we don't really believe him either. When he said, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? It seems We're trying to do both. And I'm not really, I often actually am really, that's where I'm most confused. Why are we trying to gain the whole world and still maintain our soul? Like when Jesus said that was something we couldn't do. Do you have any, I'm just curious, like, does that ring true to you or is that something I'm on my own on?
Well, yeah. By way of wrapping up here, I would say the trickiest question in interesting times, famous Chinese curse derivative times like ours, is folks going too far or not far enough on the activism scale. Right? You miss the mark by going too far or not far enough in the famous Aristotelian virtue ethics. Like, what can you affect? What change can you not affect? I saw a priest, I won't mention his name, who's an e-priest, he tweets a lot, who said, if you have spent any significant amount of time or something like that criticizing Francis and blaming him for your troubles with the faith, for your doubts that he's engendered, then you're not taking responsibility for your own soul. You need to, seek after your own salvation with fear and trembling much more. And that's an overstatement of too much passivity, right? Because it's like, no. He is Christ's vicar on earth. He is capable of being a stumbling block. He has the greatest capability of becoming a stumbling block and causing these little ones to falter. You know what happens to folks like that who do that. So he overstated the case. I'm saying something that's like half of what he's saying. I'm not saying like some of the trads, some of the Benedictist Pope people, wink, wink, and Barnhart. It's like, dude, don't regain the pontificate or the beautiful TLM and lose your own soul in the so doing. Yes. You're probably not even going to regain either of those two desiderata. But don't think that you can't fall out of grace soteriologically. You can't fall out of heaven just because you're bitching about Francis or about the Novus Ordo Missae, Like you can.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, don't, to that priest who made that tweet, don't think that having a little bit of doubt or anxiety because of Francis or because of the Novus Ordo Missae means that you're guilty of doing what the people I just described are doing. Be in the middle. First and foremost, this is what Rules for Retrogrades is all about. You overcome the anxiety by doing what you can do. And they're really those 4 pillars. Educate your own kids, love your own wife as a patriarch. You need political liberty, subsidiarity, local power to do it. And we have to work for political liberty in the subsidiarian fashion. And to do that, you have to community organize with good right-wing Christian neighbors in lawful moral ways. That's it. That's what a man who is a patriot, this is a show mainly for laymen. A lot of priests watch this show, but that's what you're doing if you took this path and you didn't become a male priest. You become a male patriarch. But at the same time, it's fine to like piss and moan about stuff some. And it's actually effective to piss and moan about it. And it's also effective to note that Francis, together with his Novus Ordo Missae, which he's really weaponizing more than Paul VI even, these 2 things, we can piss and moan about them because it's helpful to. And it doesn't mean necessarily we're not doing the things that we have control over. Do the things you have control over, and then affect the good that you can affect by doing some complaining and some criticism. Even if Francis won't change his way, let other people hear you say, would that we get a pope like Pope Leo XIII or Pius X. So I'm in the middle. I'm a political fart right winger, but I'm in the middle. I'm like, no, you can complain about Francis and it's actually helpful to do so, but make sure you have tended your own soul, your wife's soul, and your kids' souls first. Okay, I'll give you the parting shot here.
Oh, geez.
I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I have too. You just said some really good stuff, and I think it's important as a, I guess I'd be considered a trad. I don't necessarily need it. I attend TLM. That's most of my friends. But
Right.
What you're saying is really important, and it's actually what I've told people about when it came to the Hope as Fuels concept, which was, all I see though is deconstruction. On the other side, all I see is people building. We need both. Like we need to be able to recognize the areas of what's kind of there that needs to be deconstructed and taken down, and what needs to be reconstructed in the process. It's not one or the other. It's a both and situation. And so to me, the hope is that we have the ability to be able to do that. Anxiety in general is just a fear of the future. That's something that we don't have to have. It doesn't mean you won't feel it. There's a really great therapist who, speaking in more temporal terms, because I have dealt with panic disorder over the years and depression and things, had nothing related actually to Pope Francis, but 4-step process, which was you needed to face what was going on, you needed to accept it, you needed to float through it, and you needed to let time pass. I shared this actually on another podcast pretty recently with somebody, and they wanted to get into the nitty gritty of it a little bit more. But in short, you and I are talking about something right now. There's a problem. We're facing it. Now, what to say accept it does not mean to just say, hey, let's lay down and die because this is what's going on. That's not what we're saying. But we do recognize that fighting against certain things will be, in a sense, a little bit of a lost cause if done unwell or if done disordered, right? Like one of the ways we fight against it are the 4 pillars that you're talking about on this show. Those are things that you can do right now. So in the process of facing what's going on, we can go ahead and accept it. I've never been whitewater rafting, but I've always heard, I grew up surfing, but I always heard in whitewater rafting that when you fall out of the boat, the first thing you do is, okay, I'm out of the boat. You flip over on your back, you spread your arms and legs out so you don't run into anything, and you float until you reach sort of an area where the water gets still again. I think that there's a part of us right now that if we face and accept what's going on and we're willing to float with it and let time pass, that's the part where you can trust that water holding you is the hand of Christ, is the hand of God, and that we will be okay in the process. But that doesn't mean we don't reach out for a branch if we run into one and stop it a second early so that we can also help other people along the way. So I guess—
Is that Dr. Claire Weeks, Ryan?
That's Dr. Claire Weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Was that, were you talking about that at Hope is Fuel?
That was the plan. That's what Patrick was going to have me come in and talking about, because it was major for me in my recovery and getting deeper into the weeds on that.
You didn't actually present, but I mean that she was a major theme. You're kind of business partner on this and you were going to talk on it,
yes.
But were there some of the, what was it, 8 speakers who actually mentioned Claire Weeks by name? Because that's really good stuff.
Didn't actually mention, no, it is. They didn't mention Claire Weeks, but there actually is another thing that I think would be good to remember for everybody in that parting shot, which is we had a doctor on there, Dr. Mark McDonald. Excuse me, this is Dr. Nick Carderas, who had talked about the technology culture that we're in. And he said that we have allowed ourselves to be jailed with sugar-coated jails, and we're okay with it. That's not just technology. That's also in other things that we're doing right now. We sit here and we're just like, hey man, I like, it's a form of Stockholm syndrome, you know, and it's almost like we're okay with it. And that's the part where we like, no, get yourself out of the jail, whatever that jail might be, whatever that thing is. And I do personally, from my own experience, from my conversations with clergy, a lot of that is just saying simple things, reminding yourself of simple things. Look, we're not too important that we can't, as the body of Christ, suffer like Christ did on the cross. It's okay. Like that's part of the process. And this is part of the passion we participate in. That we do have this wounded reality where parents, you know, we're not even parents, where people think that kids can be a different sex than what they are. There isn't even gender. It's like you're either a boy or a girl. Like that is reality. And until we get to a point where we recognize reality, where we call things like what Pope Francis did as evil, that is the reality of it. And we can't actually have hope until we have real truth. And so that's why you doing this show and folks saying these things and trying to get to the bottom of the matter, getting to the truth is the most important thing, because with the truth, then we can have real hope about what's the future. And going back to Aquinas, you know, our hope is entirely good because in the end, it involves us in unity with God.
Beautiful. Before we can erect a lovely new building, we have to clear the ground. We got to clear the ground. That's called laying the foundation. So you got to have some destruction, some criticism before you can have the erection or new construction of beautiful, new, healthier ways and means of living. Or Ryan Moreau, thank you so much for appearing with me today. I'd love to have you back. Is there anything you'd like to call out on the Hope is Fuel conference? Is there any way people can go see a recording of this?
Yeah, they can. So hopeisfuel.com. Thanks for bringing that up. I probably should be thinking more about it. It was a great event. We had thousands of people there. The feedback's been incredible. We're really excited about what we're doing in the future, really asking for folks to chime in, even if it's as simple as hopeisfuel.com. Shoot us an email on the contact page. Tell us areas that you're lacking hope. Tell us what kind of courses you'd like to see, workshops you'd like to see. You know, we're working on things related to debt, family debt, and the slavery that comes with that. Where we've had people saying, hey, can you give us a path to relief from porn addiction? You know, the list goes on. So hope goes far, you know, in a temporal sense, far beyond just anxiety and depression. Check out hopeisfuel.com. You can access the library from the event. It becomes available Wednesday. You can still sign up there until March 31st. The doors close on March 31st to that event. Your code, you do have a code that gets people $10 off still. It's not available kind of anywhere anymore. Sometimes it would even pop up on the homepage. It's not there, but T Gordon 10 will still get people $10 off of that. And
T Gordon 10 people. It was a great conference. Go to T Gordon, go to hopeisfuel.com, use T Gordon 10, and you can still get money off and get the recording, right?
Yeah, you get the recording, you'll get the live, you'll get the videos from the live event, you'll get the live Q&A from the event. There's downloadable, you know, audio from the event. And then there were also what we call tutorials, tips, and tricks. We had 6 of the 8 presenters. Royce did not, and Bishop Strickland did not, being that they're not necessarily therapists or doctors or anything like that. But the 6 therapists and doctors we had actually also gave kind of Easter eggs, 5 to 10 minutes, different things people can do to take inventory in their life, solutions for anxiety, all kinds of things like that they can pick up there as well. So appreciate you letting me share that. We're excited about what we got in the future lined up.
So we're both expatriated Southern Californians, Ryan Moreau, Timothy Gordon. We've relocated to 2 of my very favorite states that are red states. Idaho is the most beautiful state in the American West, bar none, says I. It's where I would live. People ask me, where would I live if I didn't live in Mississippi? It's either Alabama or Idaho. And only one of those is still in the West. But you and I we're almost the same age, ex-athletes, basketball players. I just, we have a lot in common. I'd love to have you back on the show. And I appreciate everything you've said about hope is fear and
hope
about anxiety.
Yeah.
Hope is fuel. Sorry. It's just been a great time. And I think it was a really energizing way of capping off this show, part one of the show that I did on Saturday while you were doing Hope is Fuel. I've never had the tech run out on me like that, and that was disturbing. Today is also the feast day of Saint Joseph, the patron of patriarchs. This is the cheapest, or tied for the cheapest, that Sophia has ever sold the book. So if you go online, you can get Case for Patriarchy for a minimum $5. Go to sophiainstitute.com, $5 book. I think it's $5 delivery, 90-day returns. This is really the way to get a hold of your households again, folks. And 99% of you, trad or novus ordo, need the men to get control over your households, or everyone's going to live in anxiety, darkness, and despair. Get that today. The Case for Patriarchy. Happy St. Joseph's. Ryan Moreau, nice hat. I know you're not wearing a hat. God bless you, man. Thanks for coming on today.
You too. I'd do anything for that head of hair, Tim, but thank you very much, man.
Thanks.